Imagine this, you're standing in front of a mirror again. Not just any mirror, but one that seems to know your secrets. It reflects not just your face, but your patterns. The failed relationships, the jobs you leave before they leave you, the quiet addictions, the explosive reactions. The people change, the cities change, even the haircuts change. But somehow, the story remains the same. You are the common denominator in a life that keeps spinning back to its point of origin, like a cursed loop in time. And right there, staring back at yourself, a single question claws at your chest with almost primal urgency. Why do I keep doing this? Why do you text the person you promised yourself you'd never call again? Why do you sabotage the job you begged to get? Why do you lash out when all you wanted was to be understood? Why do you keep constructing the same prison and then scream for freedom? You are not alone. It is a haunting familiarity shared by millions. That quiet dread of déjà vu, not because the world is repeating itself, but because you are. The cast of characters may be different, the setting more modern, the script slightly tweaked. But the role you play? It's identical. The same fears, the same missteps, the same endings. And what's more disturbing is this. A part of you knows it. You've felt the pattern forming halfway through a new relationship, sensed the old shadows creeping into a fresh opportunity. And yet, even with that awareness, you still fall in. Over and over. It's as if something beneath your consciousness is choreographing your collapse. As if the mistakes are not mistakes at all, but rituals, reenactments, sacrifices to some ancient, unspoken wound. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." But what if your fate isn't written in the stars, but buried in your childhood, in your traumas, in your unmet needs and forgotten wounds? What if the universe isn't against you and God isn't silent, but you are the ghost haunting your own future? Most people live their lives on a loop, emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, not because they lack the desire to grow, but because they haven't seen the invisible strings tying them to their own past. You don't just inherit your grandmother's eyes or your father's voice. You inherit their fears, their silences, their unfinished stories. You carry the wars they never spoke of. You bleed from wounds you never received. And in this psychic inheritance, a question grows like a thorny vine. What if your worst decisions aren't mistakes at all, but messages? Messages from a part of yourself you've never met. A stranger inside, living in the basement of your psyche. The one who wears your pain like armor and whispers, "This is how we survive." That part doesn't care about success. It doesn't want you to be happy. It wants you to be safe, familiar, predictable, even if it means suffering, even if it means failure, because pain you know is easier to face than joy you fear you don't deserve. So you go back to the same type of partner, the same kind of self-sabotage, the same coping mechanisms, the same abyss dressed in new scenery. And when the dust settles, you blame yourself. You call it weakness, laziness, stupidity. You say, "I knew better," and you did. But knowing isn't enough when the unconscious is in control. This is not about intelligence. This is about integration. Because here's the unbearable paradox. You repeat the past, not because you want to suffer, but because some ancient part of you believes there's still a chance to fix it. Maybe this time they'll love you back. Maybe this time you'll finally be seen. Maybe this time you'll get it right. But here's the quiet tragedy. Every time you try to rewrite the old story with new characters, you only deepen the wound. You reenact the trauma instead of transcending it. You don't heal the inner child. You trap them in the same burning house. So ask yourself, what if the life you're living isn't really yours? What if it's a script written by ghosts, some ancestral, some emotional, all unexamined? And most importantly, what would it take to break the pattern? Not superficially, not with another new beginning, but at the level of soul, of shadow, of archetype. Carl Jung didn't offer easy answers, but he offered a mirror, a deeper kind of mirror, the one you've avoided, the one that doesn't just show your face but your fate. And maybe, just maybe, the only way out is in. Beneath every repetition lies a blueprint, a psychological architecture built from invisible bricks, trauma, memory, longing, and fear. You think you're making choices, rational ones, mature ones, but according to Carl Jung, most of what you call a decision is really just a reenactment, an echo, a reinforced archetype playing itself out in your psyche like a myth you never realized you were trapped in. He called it the shadow, the rejected parts of yourself that you hide, suppress, or deny, not because they're evil, but because they were once dangerous, too wild, too needy, too vulnerable to be allowed into the world of adults, rules, and survival. So you banish them, you tuck them away in your unconscious and pretend they don't exist. But they do, and they're not asleep. They're orchestrating your life, your perfectionism. That might be the shadow's reaction to growing up feeling invisible. Your people-pleasing, maybe the result of love that was only ever conditional. Your anger, your overthinking, your fear of intimacy, your chase for validation. None of these are bad habits. They are symptoms of a deeper, hidden system, one that runs on the fuel of what Jung called complexes. A complex is like a psychological landmine, an emotionally charged bundle of memories, beliefs, and experiences that cluster around a core wound. You touch it accidentally. Someone rejects you, criticizes you, forgets you, and it detonates. Not because of now, but because of then. The same explosion over and over. And yet, you tell yourself, I'm just overreacting. You aren't. You're responding to a centuries-old myth still burning behind your eyes. Nietzsche once said, "He who has a why to live can bear almost any how." But what if you've never discovered your why? Because your entire how is built around avoiding pain rather than seeking meaning. You survive, not thrive. You manage, but you do not transform. And here's where Jung's brilliance pierces through the fog. He didn't just observe the patterns. He named the inner players. You don't just have thoughts and feelings. You contain archetypes. Universal characters etched into the human psyche. The child, the orphan, the hero, the lover, the martyr, the tyrant. These aren't just symbols. They're scripts. Unconscious roles you perform again and again until you realize you were born into a play you didn't write. Take the orphan archetype. It often shows up in people who felt emotionally abandoned, physically, spiritually, or psychologically. They grow up believing the world is fundamentally unsafe, and that love must be earned. So they become hyper-independent or clingy. They test people, push them away, then punish themselves for being alone. Again, the cycle. Again, the ache. And beneath it, the orphan cries not for logic, but for witnessing. Or consider the martyr, the one who always gives, who says yes when they mean no, who carries burdens to feel worthy of love. On the surface, they are saints, but deep down, they seethe with resentment and wonder why their sacrifices never bring the love they crave. They don't realize they've been programmed to believe that love must be bought with suffering. Jung didn't create these ideas in a vacuum. He built on a rich philosophical lineage. Schopenhauer, who believed the will to live is a blind, insatiable force. Huxley, who warned that comfort can be more dangerous than pain. Sartre, who argued that we are condemned to be free, and therefore wholly responsible for what we become. All of them point toward a terrifying freedom. The past is not your prison, but your disguise. And yet, even when you see this, even when you know, why is change still so hard? Because to change means to die, not literally, but symbolically. The old self, the one who clung to trauma like a badge of identity, must dissolve. The child who coped by pleasing, the teenager who raged to feel powerful, the adult who numbed with success or solitude. All of them must be unmade. Jung called this the process of individuation, the becoming of the true self. It is not about self-improvement. It is about self-confrontation. It is the long, winding, excruciating journey into your own depths to meet the parts you disowned. The liar, the manipulator, the addict, the child who still waits to be rescued, until you look them in the eye and say, I see you. I won't abandon you again. The paradox? That very confrontation is what sets you free. Because when you face your shadow, it no longer controls you. When you feel the pain you've avoided for decades, it no longer needs to scream. When you stop trying to be who the world wants and start becoming who your soul remembers, you begin to wake up. But let's not be naive. Your psyche doesn't give up its defenses easily. You will resist, deny, justify. That's just how I am. It's not that serious. I've moved on. No, you haven't. You've copied your coping mechanisms onto new situations, but they're still running, quietly, automatically, devastatingly. And that is the hidden problem. You are not free. You are possessed, not by demons, but by patterns. You are haunted, not by ghosts, but by the parts of yourself you buried alive. And until those parts are seen, held, and integrated, you will keep writing the same chapter with different ink. Keep loving the same pain. Keep fleeing the same truth. But the question now becomes sharper. If the shadow is the gatekeeper of your suffering, could it also be the guardian of your liberation? What if the mistake isn't the repetition, but the refusal to listen? What if the part of you that keeps falling into the same trap is not broken, but trying to wake you up? The trap, then, is not the pattern itself. The trap is mistaking the pattern for your identity. And so the next question becomes not why this keeps happening, but what is it costing you? You carry it like a phantom weight, the past, not just your past, but the past of every moment you didn't understand, every emotion you pushed away, every choice you made in fear and renamed it logic. And it begins to show, not in dramatic collapses but in subtle corrosion, the dimming of passion, the quiet war in your relationships, the daily ache of almost but never quite being yourself. You repeat the same mistake not because you are foolish, but because your nervous system thinks it's safe. That's the great irony. To your body, the familiar pain is safer than the unknown freedom. Neurologically, the brain is addicted to what it recognizes. Even suffering, even self-sabotage. It loops because it knows how that story ends. But healing, joy, self-worth, these are foreign languages to a mind wired in survival. And so, like a scratched vinyl record, you return to the place you swore you'd never go again. This is not mere metaphor. Neuroscience confirms it. Pathways in the brain strengthen with repetition. Each time you react to criticism with shame, each time you silence your needs to avoid conflict, each time you overperform to be loved, you are deepening the groove. You're becoming fluent in dysfunction. And the more fluent you become, the more your identity fuses with it. Eventually, you don't just experience fear, you are the fearful one. You don't just avoid intimacy, you are unlovable. You don't just fail, you are a failure. The repetition becomes your reflection, and you stop questioning it. This is the true cost. You forget there was ever another way to be. Culture doesn't help. In fact, it colludes. Capitalism, for all its promises of freedom, thrives on your insecurity. If you were healed, whole, and unafraid, how much would you still consume? Self-help becomes another addiction. Productivity masks your pain. Even spirituality gets co-opted into ego, a race to ascend while skipping the messy, raw human work of facing the shadow. And so, the world subtly rewards your repetition. Stay the same and you'll be accepted. Break the pattern and you'll be called dramatic, disloyal, unstable. The myth of normalcy becomes a prison with invisible walls. Jung warned us about this. He said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." How many times have you said, "I guess it just wasn't meant to be"? But what if it was, and you weren't ready? What if you've mistaken your trauma response for the voice of destiny? Worse still, these patterns don't stay isolated. They ripple. The parent who never healed becomes the parent who unconsciously wounds. The leader who fears vulnerability becomes the tyrant who punishes openness. The lover who clings to control becomes the partner who calls it protection. And slowly, without malice, we pass our pain on like a family heirloom, convincing ourselves that this is what love looks like, that this is life. But underneath it all lies a hunger, a quiet, aching hunger. You feel it in the still moments, when there's no one to impress, when the phone is off and the mask is down. It's the part of you that remembers what you were before the world told you who to be. It whispers questions you don't want to answer. What have I traded for approval? Whose voice am I still trying to please? What would my life look like if I wasn't afraid? These are not soft questions. They threaten your entire self-concept. And that's why you avoid them. That's why we all do. Because to face them would be to admit that so much of your life has been built around not feeling. But here's the deeper wound. The longer you run, the more numb you become. Not just to pain, but to beauty. Joy becomes fleeting. Laughter, hollow. Love, transactional. You're surrounded by stimulation, but starving for connection. You achieve more, acquire more, impress more, and feel less. This is the soul's quiet crisis. It is not depression in the clinical sense. It's existential. It's the weight of unlived potential. It's the quiet grief of becoming a stranger to yourself. And no amount of productivity hacks or affirmation apps can fix it, because this wound doesn't want to be fixed. It wants to be felt. That's what Jung was trying to tell us all along. The psyche isn't a machine to be optimized. It's a mystery to be explored. The parts of you that sabotage your success, destroy your relationships, and derail your dreams, they are not errors. They are messages, symbols, warnings from the depths. You're not making mistakes, you're making patterns visible. And until you stop and see them, really see them, you will keep reliving them with new people, new jobs, new cities, hoping the change in scenery will save you. It won't, because the thing that needs to change is not out there. It's you. Not the you who performs. Not the one who smiles to keep the peace. Not the achiever, the caretaker, the cynic, the intellectual. But the raw, wild, wondering you beneath it all. The child, the artist, the rebel, the seeker. The you who still remembers what it felt like to be free before the world carved you into roles. So pause. Feel the stillness behind your ribs. There's a voice waiting there. Ancient, gentle, insistent. It's asking you, are you done yet? Done pretending? Done escaping? Done calling repetition fate? Because if you are, then it's time for rebellion. You don't need another affirmation. You don't need a 5-step plan. You need a revolt against the illusions you were sold, against the self you were taught to become, and above all, against the inner tyrant who whispers, stay safe, stay small. But how? How do you wage war against something that lives inside you? The answer is as paradoxical as the problem. You don't fight the pattern, you witness it. Because what you see, you no longer obey blindly. What you name, you reclaim. That's the beginning of real power. Not in becoming someone new, but in remembering who you were before you forgot. Carl Jung called it individuation, a psychological metamorphosis where the fragmented parts of the self come into conscious relationship with one another. Not perfection, not healing as in becoming fixed, but wholeness, a messy, honest, courageous integration of all that you are. That's the rebellion. You stop amputating your shadow and begin listening to it. Take the mistake you keep making, the self-sabotage, the toxic pattern, the fear that hijacks your voice every time you try to speak your truth. What if instead of resisting it, you asked it a question? What are you protecting me from? That's the revolution Jung proposed. To treat your behaviors not as brokenness to fix, but as symbols to decode. The compulsive overachiever? Maybe they're hiding the wound of feeling invisible as a child. The people pleaser? Maybe they survived by making others feel safe, even when they were drowning. The one who always runs? Maybe it's the only thing they know how to do when love starts to feel too close. What if every pattern was once a survival strategy? And what if you no longer needed it? The rebellion begins here, not with self-blame, but with sacred curiosity. And then, something strange happens. The pattern starts to loosen, because you're no longer fueling it with shame or denial. You're illuminating it with awareness. Jean-Paul Sartre once said, "Freedom is what you do with what's been done to you. You may not be responsible for the wound, but you are responsible for what you do with it now." That's the terrifying, liberating truth. Freedom isn't in the erasure of the past. It's in rewriting the meaning of it. And to do that, you must interrupt the loop. Radically, not with force, but with presence. Next time the mistake creeps in, pause. Don't react, just observe. Don't fix, just feel. Let the emotion rise. Let the old voice speak, and then speak back. Say, "I see you, but I choose differently now." At first, your nervous system will panic. Of course it will. It's addicted to the familiar. But sit with the discomfort. Let it tremble through you. This is what withdrawal from the old self feels like. This is how you reclaim choice. Because the rebellion is not loud. It's not flashy. It's not a sudden, cinematic transformation. It's a quiet defiance. Ting moments. Micro choices. You stop apologizing for existing. You speak up when you would have gone silent. You rest when you used to hustle. You say no without explaining. You say yes without earning it. You unlearn your conditioning in the smallest, most sacred of ways. But make no mistake, this is revolution. Not the kind that topples governments, but the kind that overthrows inner dictators. You are not chasing some future version of yourself. You are becoming deeply loyal to the one you already are. And that's dangerous. To systems that rely on your obedience. To people who benefit from your silence. To patterns that only survive when you forget you have a choice. Nietzsche once wrote, "The snake which cannot cast its skin has to die." This is what your mistakes have been asking of you all along. Not penance, not guilt, but metamorphosis. The courage to shed what no longer fits, even if it once saved you. And when you do, you'll find that the mistake isn't a curse. It's a compass. Each loop, each breakdown, each moment of self-betrayal has been leading you here, to this edge, the edge of your old identity, the edge of your remembered power, the edge where fear and truth hold hands and whisper, "Jump." This is the price of awakening. No one tells you this. They say change is beautiful. They forget to say it's violent, too. The tearing away of masks.
The death of personas.
The loss of certainty. You will grieve. You will resist. You will want to go back. But you won't, because something sacred has been ignited in you. You've glimpsed a self that is ungoverned by trauma. A self that knows love without performance. Worth without achievement. Joy without permission. That self is not a fantasy. It's you undomesticated. And every time you choose presence over pattern, truth over silence, courage over comfort, you feed that self. You water its roots. You give it breath. Until one day you look in the mirror and realize you no longer recognize the one who kept repeating, because she has become the one who remembers. You thought the pattern was your enemy. You thought the wound needed to be erased. You believed that freedom was on the other side of becoming someone better. Someone healed, whole, unshakably wise. But what if the final truth is this? You were never broken, only unseen, only unheard, only split into pieces because the world asked you to choose. Be loved or be true. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, but that privilege comes with a terrible cost. The death of every mask you wore for love, every persona you built for survival, every lie you told yourself just to feel safe." Here is the deepest revelation. The mistakes you kept repeating weren't signs of your weakness. They were invitations, echoes from the unconscious, symbols, dreams in disguise, rebellions against a self you were never meant to be. That self, the one who pleased, performed, conformed, is not you. It is your armor, and now you are being asked to take it off. Not to discard it with shame, but to thank it, to bow to it, to say, "You kept me alive, but I don't need you anymore." The final paradox is this. You don't become free by changing. You become free by remembering, by returning to the original truth buried beneath the roles, the noise, the fear. You were born whole. You were always worthy, and your mistakes, they've been trying to lead you back to that sacred truth all along. The inner critic that hounds you, it's just your forgotten innocence, weaponized by memory. The toxic relationship you couldn't leave, it mirrored your earliest understanding of love. The dream you keep sabotaging, it terrifies the part of you that was punished for wanting too much. Every loop is an encrypted message. Every failure, a myth waiting to be decoded. And you, yes, you are the translator. But to read the message, you must stop running from the shadow. You must stop making pain the proof that something is wrong with you. Pain is not the enemy. It is the oracle. It speaks in discomfort. It whispers in repetition. It shows up not to destroy you, but to summon you to the edge of what you thought was possible, to the very doorway where your real self is waiting, just beyond the threshold of your fear. And here is where the dream collapses into clarity. You don't fix the past. You honor it. You don't conquer your demons. You befriend them. You don't overcome the cycle. You integrate the self who was trapped inside it. Jung's greatest gift to the modern mind wasn't analysis. It was mythology. The understanding that we are not machines with errors to debug, but living stories aching to be understood. He didn't ask, "What's wrong with you?" He asked, "What is your soul trying to express through this suffering?" And that changes everything, because now your mistakes are no longer signs of failure. They are symbols, mirrors, thresholds, invitations. You begin to ask different questions. What part of me is unloved? What truth am I avoiding? What shadow am I ready to embrace? And then the dream shifts. You stop being the one who stumbles through the same lessons, hoping this time it'll be different. You become the witness, the mythmaker, the architect of meaning. You reclaim authorship. You walk back through the ruins of your choices, not with regret, but with reverence. Because every wound shaped the exact key you now hold. Every detour led you here, to the doorway of your authentic self. And this is the ultimate truth. You do not end the cycle by force. You transcend it by becoming the version of yourself that no longer needs it. The mistake dies when the lesson is no longer resisted. The loop breaks when the love that was once outsourced is finally returned inward. The shadow dissolves when it is no longer feared, but understood. So here you are at the final edge, not of your life, but of your story as you've known it. One final question echoes, ancient and electric, whispered from the core of your being. Are you willing to lose who you were, To remember who you are? The world won't hand you peace, but it will mirror your inner truth. Once you stop begging for permission and start embodying presence. And you'll know you're free when the same trigger that once collapsed you now wakes you up. You'll know you've changed when the same mistake returns. And you greet it like an old friend, smiling, because this time you see it clearly. And this time you choose differently, not because you've conquered it, but because it no longer defines you. And so, you become the one who remembers, the one who listens, the one who walks away from the loop, not in anger but in understanding. This is not the end. This is the beginning of a life led by something deeper than fear. A life authored by awareness. A life where the same mistake never had to repeat, because you finally heard what it was trying to say. And you answered with the only thing it ever asked for, truth.